Pat is currently a social studies teacher here in the district at the high school. She has a BA in French and History from the State University of New York College, Brockport, and a master's in secondary education from Duquesne University. After college graduation, Pat began her teaching career in Augusta, Georgia as a French teacher. She was also the department chairperson of the foreign language department. She came to Pittsburgh in 1978, was employed by the Allegheny Intermediate Unit as the gifted and talented teacher in Clairton School District. Pat was in attendance a year ago, January, when the shuttle disaster happened. This week, she's conducting the presentations, as I said, using the theme, which tells you how she feels regarding the space and the shuttle program. Her theme is, "The Dream is Still Alive." It's my pleasure to present to you Pennsylvania's teacher in space and space ambassador, Pat Palazzolo.
I see some familiar faces out there. How many of you saw me at your school already? Oh, well then you know what we're going to do. We're going to try to get your parents involved in some of the activities to see how well they took in what you probably went home and told them. How many parents heard about the shuttle toilet? That's what goes home all the time. But we'll do it again tonight. We'll see how straight a story the kids gave you on that. And we've got kind of a mixed audience here, so we're going to do a little bit of everything. Some of you, anybody here from Fort Couch, your voice? Any of the kids? Okay. Well, one thing you'll get to see tonight that you didn't get to see before are some of the toys in space and the videotape, because they didn't get to do everything. We've been doing a mixed bag at different schools, so it's going to be the whole thing tonight. And we'll go right through the mission and right up to what's going to happen in the future. But as Mr. Smell told you, I am Pennsylvania's teacher in space, and I feel very fortunate in that, because after Krista McAuliffe was selected, we really expected to become American Express cards and go home, and that would be it, and it would have been a nice experience. Instead, we were named Space Ambassadors, which simply means that we've been supplied with all sorts of tapes and videotapes and slides and books, and just about anything that comes out arrives at my house and ends up in the basement, trying to find a good way to go through that. And in addition, we do get some continued training, simply so that we'll have this as an educational experience to be able to present to the kids. What I'm going to do now, and it was flipping a little bit, I'll see how it is. I'd like to run just about a minute and a half of a videotape that Channel 11 News did with me when I first found out I was one of the 2 Pennsylvania teachers in space, because that'll let you see the excitement at the time and give you a little bit of the background. But what I'd ask the kids to do is to listen especially to the very last line that the reporter says, because it does come into play with what's going to be happening. So let me turn this on. Let's hope that it works.
It was supposed to be the night you could see the Space Shuttle Challenger fly over Pittsburgh. Unfortunately, we couldn't see it. But Joe Bell is with one skywatcher tonight, so we not only see it someday, but fly it as well. Okay, let's do the countdown. 5, 4.
Meet Patricia Palazzolo, mother, teacher, and potential space traveler. Today, she and another educator from Lehigh County were named the Pennsylvania finalists in a nationwide search for the first teacher to ride the space shuttle. An hour after she got that honor, Challenger rose from its launch pad, and tonight it passed over our area in the northeastern sky. Palazzolo rushed outside for a glimpse, but as she explained to her neighbors, the high cloud formations hid Challenger from view. It did not dim her enthusiasm.
We are still being peeled off the ceilings, I think, right now. It's been really exciting. My husband has enjoyed the whole thing.
So have the gifted students she teaches at Clairton High School.
And that's the most exciting thing about this, is the new energy I found in teaching and the new energy the students have found to finish up the school year.
At the same time, she'll be fulfilling a dream she's had since the first Americans went into orbit, nurtured by her pilot father and strengthened through her own amateur study of astronomy.
So she has a rich background to this. She's very much, into it and qualified for it too. Do you hear that? Qualified.
And this 32-year-old with a master's degree feels good about her chance to win out over 119 other teachers with the same hopes for a January launch.
Well, I did play the lottery.
This may be the closest that Pat Palazzolo ever gets to the space shuttle. But 10 years ago, no one would have predicted that she'd get a shot at all. Who knows who will be able to ride it 10 years from now. Joe Bell, Channel 11 News in Jefferson.
Okay, who knows who'll get to ride it 10 years from now. I actually started kindergarten. I was with all sorts of kindergartners this week, and I started kindergarten in the same year which NASA was established. And my dad did take me outside. I remember one of my earliest memories is tracing the path of Echo 1 in the sky at night. And he did used to tell me that by the time I grew up, there would be people traveling back and forth on a regular basis. But I don't know if I really would have believed that I would have come as close as I did to getting that chance. But when you think about it, and you think about all the changes, I start to wonder what's going to happen when these kids grow up. And, you know, they do say that our first colony of Martians is already going to our preschools right now. And I have a 4-year-old son right now that I pawned off on a neighbor so I could be here tonight. And it's kind of fun to think about where they might be. But what did happen is the 114 of us met in Washington, D.C. in a fantasy summer, 1985. And we got to go to the White House and meet the president and have all sorts of fantastic experiences. But what really surprised me was so many of the people we met. Because, of course, we met astronauts and politicians and educators, but some of the judges on the National Selection Committee were not people that you would normally think about when you think of space. One, for example, was Wes Unseld, who was a basketball player with Washington, D.C. And the kids always like to hear about that because it's interesting to think that someone good at sports would also be interested in space. And another was Dr. Jarvik. And what do you remember about Dr. Jarvik? He invented the mechanical heart, and he was one of our judges. But the one I thought was really interesting to me was Pam Dauber, who played Mindy in Mork and Mindy, and she's now in a series called My Sister Sam. And at first, teachers were a little bit skeptical. You know, what does this actress know about judging the teacher in space? But it turns out that she's a worldwide traveler, and she's very interested in and very knowledgeable about solar energy, and those were her credentials. So what it really got me thinking about was all the very different ways that space is related to education and that careers can be related to space. So a couple that I like to bring up when I talk to kids are art and law, because you really don't think of those normally. And art is really natural, because students love to look at the patches all over the astronauts' outfits. And I traveled with my space fair. I wasn't going to bring them tonight, and then I saw in the parking lot so many students coming, and I thought, okay, I'll bring the mascot along. That's Cub Canaveral. He has the right stuffing. He's got his mission patch on. He was at the launch with me. He's been everywhere. And the 2 mission patches that were on 51L were these. I'll talk about this one in a minute because I have a bigger version of it. And I know you can't all see this, but this was the actual 51L patch. And at first, when you look at a patch, you might think, you know, it's a picture of a shuttle every single time, maybe the American flag, and that's about it. But each one tells a little story. And this one in particular has a little silver thing in the middle of the flag, which happens to be Halley's Comet. Because one of the things Challenger was going to do was to send out a probe to check on the comet. And then around all the edge are the names of the astronauts. And by Krista McAuliffe's name, you see a little red dot, which happens to be an apple for the teacher, so that we know that there was a teacher aboard. Every mission that goes up has its own special patch with its own symbols. One of the ones I really love is the Apollo 17 patch. And this is interesting to kids. They can sometimes get into space history by checking back. Apollo 17 was the last mission to the moon. And the astronauts have a big part in designing the patches, and then artists help them put it all together. But Apollo 17 has the American flag, it has a statue of the god Apollo, and that makes sense. But if you really look carefully, way in the background, there's a little tiny planet Saturn. And I talked to all 3 astronauts off of Apollo 17, and they told me what that was supposed to mean is, this might be the end of America on the moon, but it would not be the end of America going into space. And that was the message they were trying to give. So it's fun to have the kids think about what a future patch might look like. What's that first patch going to have on it when the shuttle starts to fly again? Well, what kind of symbols would the kids put on for a mission to Mars? So all that gets them thinking about the relationship between art and space. And of course, what's really important is the number of artists that are needed to draw pictures of what a space station might look like in the future, or what a planet might look like that we've never been to yet. All to make it a little easier to understand than just listening to the scientists. And when we get into talking about some of the future of space and see some of the slides, we'll look at some more of those art pieces. Now, the Teacher in Space patch for tonight gives us a very important message. The white is the shuttle taking the first teacher into space. The blue is the Earth. And in the middle, you see a flame, the pink and the orange. And it's the torch of learning. The message for the kids is to develop whatever talents they have, whether they can run fast or write a story or program a computer, because we're definitely going to need all those talents in the future. The message for you as parents and for all of us as educators is to grasp this torch of learning and spread the knowledge about space, because it's definitely going to affect our kids' futures. Well, when I've been with the students in the schools, we've started to brainstorm about some other symbols, some other pictures. And we started to talk about what a handicapped parking lot symbol is, handicapped parking space. And you've all seen those with a little wheelchair. And you know that if you park there and you're really not supposed to, and they catch you, you might get a ticket. But I asked the students to think about a person on Earth who cannot use his or her legs. Is that person still going to be considered handicapped up in orbit? And you're shaking your head, why not?
Because there's no gravity.
Right, you're in a weightless microgravity environment. You can float around. And in fact, if we went up there, we'd have to make sure to take time to exercise on that treadmill, where you march, you don't go anywhere, just to exercise. Because if you didn't, you'd get very skinny little legs and fall flat on your face when you came back to Earth. And some of the Russian astronauts, especially in the early days, did not want to take time out from the work schedule to do that. And they didn't realize the importance of exercising in space. And they very often did have to be carried off of their spacecraft when they returned. So that introduces us to the ideas of laws in space. I had the pleasure about a year ago of meeting a man named Dr. de Saussure, who happens to be an astro lawyer. He actually has a PhD in space law. And his concerns are not so much the big issues right now between the Americans and the Russians. He's a bit more concerned about civil law, people-to-people law, because as we know right now, there are 2 cosmonauts living up there on that space station. And in the future, we'll have people on a permanent basis living in space. So he started to talk about the Judge Wapner type law. Anybody seen Judge Wapner in the People's Court? Dumb cases, and the one I always use as an example is the ultimate dumb case, is the one where a man in his sleep punched out his own front teeth. Now he did this because he was having a dream in which he was so mad at his neighbor, he thought he was sucking the guy in the mouth. Instead woke up, his own teeth were gone. Then he took the other man to court to make him pay for fixing his teeth. Now imagine getting sued for something you did in another person's dream. We could get in some real trouble sometimes. However, there are equally dumb cases, on even a more serious nature. And there was a case, the Harvey Milk case, some of you might know, way back a few years ago in California, in which a man committed murder. And the defense attorney said, jury, you've got to let my client off. He'd eaten too many Twinkies. Famous Twinkie defense. This guy was a really nice guy, supposedly, except for all the sugar in his system. Well, Dr. de Saussure, the space lawyer, feels that someday something like this could happen. When you're up in space, your face is very puffy looking from all the fluids traveling up into your body. And we all know how important body language is and facial expressions. So if I stood here like this, you'd think I hated you. Well, Dr. de Saussure feels that one day a case may happen where an assault takes place, some kind of fight breaks out, and the defense attorney will say, jury, you've got to let my client off. He misinterpreted the facial expressions of the other person. If Twinkies can do it on Earth, why not puffy faces in space? So kids who want to be lawyers, or judges, or policemen, all of that might be a little bit different up in space. But perhaps one of the most fun things I've had is getting the kids to brainstorm about who could possibly own space. First graders like to tell me very often that President Reagan owns outer space. I'm sure he'd be glad to know that. And we get all sorts of other interesting answers. High school kids are usually ready to tell me that whoever gets there first, they're the ones that are going to get it. And then we usually get everybody, nobody, aliens, who knows. But I get the kids to think about each effect. If we say whoever gets there first, I ask them to think about what they learned when they were in 5th or 6th grade about the explorers coming over to the New World. If somebody came over and plunked a flag down and said, I claim this in the name of Spain, did everybody else just sit there and say, okay, you can have it? No, you know what would happen. Right, there are all sorts of wars going on at that time. So you try to make the analogy to space. On the other hand, if we say that everybody owns it, then that means we really should have to get every single little country to agree on who could use the space station that we might put up, when they could go there, and all that. It's certainly very difficult to get everybody to agree on anything. On the other hand, if we say nobody owns it, that it's to be kept as a wilderness like Yellowstone National Park, then if I'm an American businessman and I want to put a factory up into space, and it's supposed to be kept as a wilderness, that might be limited. And there are some commercial uses for space that might help everybody. Certain pharmaceutical drugs that could be made to help cancer patients and other diseases, and all sorts of things we haven't even thought of yet. And already there are some countries who feel that they own the space up over them. There's some countries around the equator who feel that, this orbit into which we like to place communication satellites might be 22,000 miles up over their heads, but they say, hey, it's up over our heads, not up over your head, United States, pay us off. So there's going to be some problems. We as adults can't even decide who wants the Gulf of Sidra. We've got Gaddafi there saying, line of death, this is mine. We say it's international. These kids are going to grow up and have to face the problems of who owns outer space. How high up does something have to be before another country can shoot it down, saying it's invading airspace? All those questions will come up. So even if none of them want to go into outer space, they're all going to grow up to be the taxpayers and the voters who are going to make the decisions about things like Star Wars and how much money to spend on space and whether to go to the moon or put a space station into orbit. So with that in mind, we're going to put some of the adults to the test and see if they went home and told you the right information. I was having them work on trying to figure out where space is to start with and how high up it goes. So we're going to get a brave volunteer up here. Anybody want to volunteer? Grown-ups aren't volunteering. Well, we'll go with the kids and we'll see. And then we're going to make them get up here later on. We'll draft them. Okay, you come up here. You're going to be the Earth, all right? What's your name?
Dustin.
Justin. Okay, Justin, hold your arms up nice and big. There's the Earth. Okay, how about you come up here? And you're going to be the moon. I really did want a moon, one of the parents, but they're chicken tonight, so. Okay. All right, what's your name?
David.
David. David, we're not even going to let you move because we know you know the answer, all right? We're going to let the parents put you in the right place. We want David to stand the right distance from Dustin to show where the moon should be. Now, how many of you stand right there, how many of you like about where he is? How many of you want to move him closer? How many of you want to move him farther away? Ah, you've been training the parents very well. Okay, so what we're going to do, whoops, I need to sneak over here and get my rope. Technology here. All right. Whoops. Having all sorts of things happen. We're going to let David take his rope and go the right distance from Dustin. So I'm going to let you, whoops. Now up here. Okay. You take this and you walk. You know what, Dustin? I want you to follow me for a minute. We're going to move the Earth here. So we're going to let this really go out and show the distance. So we're going to move the Earth right over here. You go up the aisle, okay, right towards the camera. Probably love that. You stand right here. Keep going. Okay. Okay, move the Earth there. Great. Okay, that's about it. We don't want to knock any cameras down. Okay. Well, this is a really good exercise to get the students, even the littlest ones, to recognize how far apart things are in space. Because if we had a globe here that's about a 16-inch globe, about a classroom-sized globe, and we measured it around its middle, we'd get about 4 feet. 4 times 10 gives us 40, and that means David's about 40 feet from this globe. That's because the real moon up there is 10 times from the Earth the distance around the middle of the Earth, which puts it at about 240,000 miles away. And I always tell them that if we were going to have a model of Mars and another volunteer, we'd actually have to get in my car and drive down the road half a mile to be far enough from good old Dustin here. Things are very far apart in space. But right now, we're a little bit more concerned with the shuttle, so I'm going to get another volunteer. Okay? All right, how about number 22? Josh. Okay, your name's Josh? See, I have a spy here. Okay. Now, I'm going to ask the parents to decide where to put Josh. Josh, hold your finger up. That's the space shuttle. I remember you now, Josh. Okay. That's the space shuttle. We want Josh to put the space shuttle where the space shuttle would be. Here's the Earth, there's the moon, and we're going to decide where you should fly this shuttle in a normal orbit. How many of them want him to go all the way to the moon? Everybody want him to go to the moon? Okay. How many of you want him to go about halfway? Okay. How many of you want him to stay right where he is? Okay. Very good. This is where he should be, because the space shuttle can only go up a couple of 100 miles. So if you've ever been to Harrisburg or to Gettysburg, you've been as far away from Upper St. Clair as that space shuttle ever used to go. And that's sometimes difficult for the students to realize, because to them, that's ancient history when people were walking around the moon. And they know that we have people on the moon, and so that's where they think the shuttle goes. But, of course, when they went to the moon, it was in a very different kind of a space vehicle, and if we go back again, it certainly won't be in a shuttle. It's going to be in something else. So the space shuttle stays right here by the Earth, and we're going to talk about why that's okay. So with that in mind, we'll let you guys go sit down. What the shuttle does do is to make deliveries into space, and what it happens to be delivering is satellites. And since the moon doesn't have any MTV or weather or anybody to spy on, it's okay that we don't have satellites going around the moon. We need them around the Earth. So what happens is they put the shuttles in the back of the cargo bay, and the satellites are taken up into space and they're deployed, which simply means kicking them out of the space shuttle. There's two ways to do this. One is a frisbee deploy, and that's just what it sounds like, as if you're holding a frisbee and throwing it straight up towards the ceiling. It springs out of the cargo bay. And the other deploy is a pan deploy. And that's where you picture a record player with a turntable spinning around and around. It's got the satellite on it. They get it going and they release it, and up it spins out of the cargo bay. Well, about a year and a half ago, somebody left a screwdriver sitting on that turntable, got it spinning, off went the little satellite, and then off went the little screwdriver. So yes, if you look at the stars some night, you know there now is a screwdriver, probably worth $700, going around and around the Earth. Now, one other thing happens. When you get those satellites out, they're only up 200 miles, and that's not high enough for a satellite to do any good in most cases. Some of those communication satellites are up 22,300 miles, and the shuttle can't take them that high. So what happens is, after they're out, and the shuttle's clear, about 45 minutes later, some engines fire on the satellite itself, and then it blasts itself up to the higher orbit it needs to be in. And when you see astronauts out in light spacesuits doing things, they're sometimes trying to catch satellites that have not had their engines fire, or something's wrong with them. And one more thing we need to notice, though, is in this picture you can see that the windows take up a very small part of the space shuttle. And the window is the only section, this area, where there were people. The people were here, and the rest of this is cargo bay. The cargo bay is 60 feet long, so it's so big you could actually park a school bus in it, and your family car and still have room left over. And I asked students to make a comparison with a tractor trailer. I had the kindergartners today and some of the younger students holding their arms up to show me a tractor trailer, and then I asked them, and how much of a part of that is for the driver? Right, and they showed me a very small part. And that's the same thing with the space shuttle, and we'll see how small in just a little bit. So what we're going to do now is to do just that, because we're going to get to some slides and videotape, so I'm going to leave some other things about how things orbit and all till later. So what we're going to do now, and I'll take students for this part, but then I'm going to insist that we get some brave parents up here. We're going to set up a crew cabin, so that you can see exactly how much room they have in the space shuttle. So with that in mind, I'm going to get some volunteers. Okay, Dustin, you want to come up here, because he knows the route here. We're going to do this on the stage, I think. And we'll let you take that up there for me. Okay? Okay, you can kind of set that out. You're going to need to put the yellow rope that way, the other part this way. Okay, now we need about 3 more. Okay, how about 1, 2, you want to go up? Okay, 3. And you can help them get the ropes. Okay, you're going to hold a knot. Each one holds a knot. Give them a knot, Dustin. Okay, and then square yourselves out like you're making a boxer's ring, fighting wrestling ring. Okay? So you're each going to get a knot. Very good. Okay, this one got it tied. Dustin, did you tie it for him? No. Yes. Okay, no, not yours, his. Okay, tie it for him. Okay, your fault. We don't even have quite enough room. Maybe you could move over a little bit that way. There we go. So we don't want you falling off the stage. Okay, well, Dustin's getting that settled. What I'm going to do is ask for some volunteers, some adults preferably, because the kids haven't had a chance yet to see this with adults. Are you pushing? Good, come on down. Okay, another one. How about you? 1, 2, okay, 3. Mr. Lindstrom's come down. 4. Okay, 5, 6. Okay, 7. We need 1 more. Okay, 8. Way at the back. Okay, and if you would please go up. I guess you have to go around the steps, or I don't know, you can just jump on the stage here. Okay, and get inside the rope. Okay. Is that tied for you? No. Okay, you can get this one, Dustin, so you can pick this up so we can see. Okay, now, don't trip any of these parents now. They're being so brave, we don't want to. Now, what you're looking at is the mid-deck of the space shuttle. The space shuttle's crew quarters have 3 decks. The bottom deck is called the avionics bay, and actually people don't go down there. So the people operate out of 2 levels. The very top level is called the flight deck. That would be 1 floor above them if they could get up there. But it would be even smaller than this. And that top part is where the commander and the pilot sit and control the shuttle, and it has the windows. But most everything, the living, the eating, the sleeping, many of the experiments happen in the middle level, called the mid-deck. It doesn't have any windows, and it's only as big as this roped-in area. It's 13 feet down each side, 12 feet across the back, and just 9 feet across the front. So I've asked the kids to go home and measure their bedrooms, remembering that the biggest measurement I gave them is 13 feet. This, of course, is empty. If they were really up on a space shuttle, they have a cooking galley in one corner, they have the bathroom, along one wall is where the sleep restraints are, two of the walls have lockers on them where they store their belongings and some of the experiments, and every so often you've got somebody out in the middle of the room with that treadmill trying to get his exercises done, all in this space. And I've been doing this with students, but now they can really get a picture, right, of how it looks to have 8 adults in there. Because they've been flying with no fewer than 5 crew members aboard, and October of last year, they took up 8 people. That was the biggest crew ever. And you can see how 8 adults look in this area. Of course, if Mr. Lindstrom got sick of looking at all their faces, the one thing he could do up in space that I can't do right now would be to float up over their heads, and he'd have a little bit more room that way. But the ceiling in this room is only 7 feet high, so he still couldn't get that very far away, and his feet would probably be hanging down somebody's face, and there wouldn't be much privacy. And the other thing is, we do have just one woman aboard. That's another thing for the girls to think about. There's usually only one woman aboard and 6 or 7 men. Now, when I say that to elementary students, they sometimes go, ooh. I say it to high school kids, and they go, ah, those girls are all ready to go. So for the next thing we do, and then when you see the slides and the videotapes, remember, this is it. This is as big as the middeck of the space shuttle, except it's empty. And with that in mind, I'm going to ask my nice volunteer corner posters to drop the rope on the floor, and we'll let our astronauts be welcomed back to Earth without tripping. Okay, let's give them a round of applause. They were brave. So they pushed up there. They went away. And what we're going to do now is to take our special voyage into space. And this is the part where the kids probably all tell you about eating and sleeping and everything else, and especially about the bathroom. But we're going to go through it, because that's the part that everybody wants to know about, is all the different things that people do in space. So we're going to see how the adults work, right? We're going to see their best imaginations. And I'm going to ask you to settle back, picture yourselves on the space shuttle, ready to go up on a safe voyage. And if we were really going to launch, of course, the nose of the shuttle is up at that point, so our backs would be on the floor and our knees would be up over our heads. They have to get strapped in like that 2 hours before the scheduled launch time. And if there are rain delays or other delays, they might have to sit like that for 5 or 6 hours, all strapped in. But this is a perfect launch day, so the countdown begins. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Oh, you know, we have to stop at 6 because they do something important. They light the 3 main engines on the back of the orbiter, and that causes the whole thing to tilt forward about 3 feet and then back. Just as if you were on a bus or in a car and it stopped too quickly and you did one of these. And the astronauts refer to that as twang. It's not a science term. It's just astronaut talk for we know we're about to go. That feeling of moving. And they continue. 5, 4, 3, 2. Now at 2, something even more important happens. They light the 2 solid rocket boosters, the 2 white ones on either side of the big red tank. Up until now, if you had an emergency, you could get off the top of the shuttle into a metal basket that would zip you very quickly down a cable behind a wall and into an army tank painted white. And there you'd be safe, even if the whole thing went up on the launch pad. But once you light the rocket boosters, you cannot turn those off, and you must launch. There are 8 bolts holding them down, and each bolt weighs 100 pounds. But if somebody forgot to release them, it would rip itself off the launch pad anyway. And that's one of the things they're going through right now, is they really would like to try to be able to test those things in launch position before they try to fly again. And yet right now, we don't know when to hold them down and test them. But yours are functioning perfectly, and so they continue. 1, 0, lift off. And for the first 2 minutes, everything is shaking violently. There's a tremendous amount of noise. But after those first 2 minutes, when you're up about 28 miles high, those 2 rocket boosters separate and fall back to Earth. You continue up a bit more, then the external tank separates and falls back to Earth. So about 8 minutes after you left the ground, you're just in the part that looks like an airplane. It's quiet and smooth and beautiful. The chairs you're in are folded and stored, and you look around, because now you're weightless, and some of those weird things start to happen. First of all, you've got to tie your boots more tightly because your feet get smaller, and that's because, as I mentioned earlier, all the fluids go to the top part of your body and stay there for the whole length of the time you're in space. So for that same reason, your legs get very skinny, Your waists get 2 inches smaller, but your chest get 2 inches bigger. You're also 2 inches taller because there's no gravity pulling down on your spine. You're not wearing a spacesuit. There's only 2 spacesuits aboard, and those are used only to go outside the shuttle into space. What you're wearing is one of these things, which is a flight suit. And it's not really that special. It happens to be blue because NASA tested blue material to make sure it wouldn't fray, and since it worked, they keep using it. It's just cotton, but what it does have is a lot of pleating around the back and a lot of Velcro so that you can adjust for your changing waist size and chest size and not hulk out of your suit and rip it at the seams. But this can get really hot. I can attest to that, wearing this all day long, running around schools. So once they're up there, they tend to take this off and wear just a t-shirt and slacks or even a t-shirt and shorts. And of course, you're floating around. You don't want to go kicking your friendly astronauts in the face. So you take your boots off and very often wear things that look a lot like slipper socks. Now your faces get really puffy looking from that same fluid. We mentioned that earlier. And ladies, your hair would start to do one of these. Now those are just some of the strange and interesting things. Some of the not so nice things. We talked about a treadmill and exercising. Well, if you were to exercise on the treadmill at home and start to work up a sweat, it would go down because of gravity. But one of the things the women really hate, the women especially, is that if you're up there, it just hangs on you until you have a big sweat ball around your head. It's very awful, and you have to peel it off. Worse yet is space sickness. A lot of the kids remember having been car sick. Well, if you know that feeling, you know what it might be a little bit like to be space sick. And quite a number of the astronauts have that problem. If you get space sick, it lasts for 3 days, unless you're Senator Jake Garner. Remember when the senator went up? He had to promise he'd be sick in space, because that was his duty. He was supposed to be checked out. Well, he was sick for the first 3 days, just like many of them get sick. Then when he naturally recovered, because it just seems to go away after 3 days, he had to continue taking pills to make him stay sick for the rest of the voyage. And he had a good time anyway, so it was great. But it is such a problem to be sick half the time you're in space that they're spending quite a bit of money trying to figure it out. And they've even given Ioneer Hospital here in Pittsburgh a $300,000 grant to study it. So far, they're not finding too much. If you get car sick on Earth, that does not mean you're the kind of person to get space sick. On the other hand, if you don't get car sick, that doesn't mean you're safe up there either. They don't know what to think about it. The only thing they have found so far is that for whatever reason, women tend to get space sick a little bit less often than men. And now they're saying they don't really think it's even that the women feel any better. The women just complain less. Men are bigger babies. But you don't go into a 5th grade group and tell them that. So I do, for the boys' sake, say that for now, and I do say for now, we need the guys along, because there aren't any women who can fly the thing. But I did get to train on the simulator as a commander, and I had a male co-pilot, or male pilot, so you never know. And who knows, one of these girls tonight might be a female commander. We do need everybody. But talking about all that space sickness gets me thinking about eating, and I know the parents can remember that way back in the beginning of the space program, they were all eating out of toothpaste tubes. And that's because they really didn't know what would happen when people tried to eat in space. They didn't know if peristalsis and all that would work, and they thought maybe the people would swallow the food and it would just float right back out again. And because they didn't want that happening, that's why they squished everything up to the texture of toothpaste, and that's all those poor guys had to eat. Nowadays, they have a lot of freeze-dried food, ranging from shrimp cocktail to beef burgundy, and I've had some of it, it's pretty good, and some non-freeze-dried food, such as bananas and soft cookies, but nothing that would make crumbs. Can't salt your food to space. Because if you try to, the little salt crystals not only would never get on your food, but they'd float all around and could actually get into some of the instruments and be dangerous. So what they have instead is liquid salt that they can just inject into whatever they're eating. Now other liquids, like Tang or whatever they're drinking, that's done through a straw, except if you take your mouth off the straw, the liquid continues to come out and out and out till it's all gone. So what they have is a little turnkey device. You take a sip, you turn the key, and it pinches the straw closed until you're ready for another sip, and you open it back up again. But the kids know that my favorite part in all of this has been getting to meet so many of the astronauts. And one of my favorite astronauts, he's actually not an astronaut anymore, but he was in the astronaut corps, is Joe Allen. And he's been on the show 321 Contact that the students watch. He is only 5'4", which is shorter than I am, so you don't have to be a big person to go into space. And both his parents are teachers. So he loves kids, and he loves teachers, and he loves to just talk to everybody. And he's kind of a big kid himself when he gets into space, So one time when he was up there, just to see what would happen, he spilled his orange juice on purpose. And it made a little orange ball, and he bopped it around the cabin, and then he could blow on it and make it move about gently. And when he finally got tired of that, he stuck a straw right into the middle of it, and he started to suck. And you see this little ball getting smaller and smaller and smaller, till it was just gone. Now, of course, eating something like grapes or popcorn, trying to pop it into your mouth is pretty easy, because you can just set the grape there, and when you're ready, give it a little tap, and wait for it to fly in. And the funniest thing I've seen was someone eating a banana. I think it might have been Joe Allen, too. He took the banana, got a picture of this now, peeled it, the peel was hanging down like this, 3 parts. He aimed the banana at himself like this, and he gave the little banana peels a twirl, so they were like a propeller, and it just came flying into his mouth. So our kids are not the only ones who play with their food. Sleeping, as I mentioned when you were up here, is done in a sleep restraint, and those are usually set up along the walls. But a sleep restraint is a lot like a big old sleeping bag. You just zip yourself in, but it can be attached to the wall to keep you from bopping around the room in the middle of the night. Now, you wouldn't have to use one. In fact, when they had fewer astronauts going up, sometimes the astronauts would just tape themselves, use some duct tape. Duct tape is big in the space program. They'd use that, and they'd tape themselves to a wall. But what they found is that their natural body posture and weightlessness is like this, bent with your arms hanging. And unless you consciously think about keeping your arms down, they'll do this. And the astronauts said it was actually pretty disconcerting to wake up in the morning and find these disembodied hands floating in front of their faces. Plus, they always had the feeling like they were falling all the time. So if they don't sleep with the sleep restraint, you'll see them very often with their arms folded, just because of that. But most often they use the sleep restraint. It doesn't really matter which way you attach it, right side up, sideways, upside down. With your eyes shut, you can't tell. It's equally comfortable. You could even float. Now, the next thing we have to talk about the spacesuits, because I mentioned earlier that there are only 2 aboard. And that's because they weigh so much. Each weighs almost 300 pounds. And sometimes they don't even have a reason to use them during a particular mission. In fact, Challenger's last mission, they had no intention to go outside the shuttle. But they're there just in case of an emergency. Now, what made me nervous was to think about 2 spacesuits and perhaps 8 astronauts. If you ever lost air pressure or temperature or oxygen, you'd be in trouble without a spacesuit. So what NASA has designed, and they have not yet flown them, but I imagine they will when they start to fly again with extra safety concerns, are what they call personal rescue units. And I refer to them as beach balls because they're only 34 inches. So picture how tall you are and picture a 34-inch ball. And in the case of an emergency, if you're not one of the 2 with the spacesuit, you dive into this little ball and zip yourself in. And there you are, all crouched down, and it's pitch black. But you have the right temperature and the right pressure and enough oxygen to survive for 2 hours. What you hope happens during those 2 hours is that they launch another shuttle to come rescue you, and the people with the spacesuits on will carry your little beach balls over to the other shuttle. There's even a pulley system like sending laundry out that could do that. Problem is, if it's raining at Cape Canaveral when it's time to send up a shuttle, they're not going to launch it. They cannot launch a space shuttle in the rain because they'd endanger the new crew. And that's because of what the space shuttle is made of. When the shuttle comes in for a landing, it's actually falling in for a landing. There's no engines to fly in. They slow it down and it starts to drop through the atmosphere. And of course, as it does that, the air rubs across it more and more, and if it were anything but what it is, it would burn up in the atmosphere. It's made out of aluminum. But what keeps it from burning up is that it's covered with thousands of the heat insulation tiles, the famous tiles you hear about. Yeah, you've got one right there. The heat insulation tiles, there are up to 30,000 of them. Columbia, the oldest shuttle, has about 31,000, and Atlantis, the newest one, has 25,000. The reason it has fewer is because they've developed a blanketing material that can cover parts of the shuttle that don't take as much heat. But this is one of the space shuttle tiles. It's an unusually thick one, but they're very expensive because every one is it's a different shape. Even the ones that look similar are actually slightly different. No 2 are alike. So if they break one or lose one, they cannot just go into a bin of shuttle tiles and pull one out. They have to get one of the exact size and shape that broke. The black ones have a chemical coating that allows them to withstand double the heat of the white ones, so that's what's black on the bottom. They're actually made of a silica compound, though, sand compound. They're a ceramic. And there's a felt pad on the bottom, which is glued to the aluminum skin of the space shuttle. Now, they do what they're meant to do very well. I've seen a person from NASA put a blowtorch to one of these until it's glowing red hot. And as soon as it's glowing, I saw him reach up grab hold of it, and it's already cool. It can dissipate the heat that quickly. And yet, it's so fragile that if I were to drop it, it would break. It's like holding styrofoam. And at the speed at which a space shuttle travels, one raindrop would act just like a bullet and could shatter the tile. So that's why it's so important for them not to launch in the rain. They are very different, as I said, in shape. Our other Pennsylvania finalist has one that looks much more like a floor tile and is very thin. And this is about as thick as you're going to see them. This one also is stamped with OV099, Orbit Vehicle 099, and that's Challenger's number. So this particular tile came off of the right wing of the Shuttle Challenger. Now, we have one more thing to talk about, and that, of course, is what you've probably all heard around the supper table, and that's the Space Shuttle toilet. But just to make sure you got it right, I'll tell you about the toilet. You saw how small the mid-deck is, and that's where the bathroom is. So you can imagine how very small the bathroom is. In fact, you can't even walk into it and turn around. You have to back into it. But you're weightless. So you're floating into this bathroom, floating in. Now you're finally in the room, but you're floating. On the floor are some toe loops. So you stick your feet under these loops. And now you're still floating like this, though. And you've got to sit down, but you can't see where you're trying to sit. Worse yet is the hole in the toilet. I have the WCS, Waste Control System Training Manual, and I quote, "The greatest problem is that of proper alignment of the crew member with the hole." It's this big. That's it. When you have 7 friends aboard and you're weightless, you don't want to miss. Talk about flying in space. So, you're ready to do this now, but you can't see. So there's a mirror here, and a mirror here, and yes, they call it the rear view mirror. You line yourself up, you sit down, and now you're ready. Put your seatbelt on, ready to go. Next, we have the problem with what the toilet works, how it works. Well, there's no water in it because the water would all float away, so it has instead a fan system that spins around and shreds the waste. So when you're ready to go, the solid waste actually hits the fan, gets shredded up, and goes to the bottom of the space shuttle. And they store that in a special tank and bring it back to Earth. Remember I told you nobody goes in the bottom of the space shuttle. They bring it back down. They used to, especially in the early days, have people analyzing that stuff when they came back to Earth because they wanted to know how digestion worked and all that. So when I, as a teacher, tell kids there are many careers in the space program, you never know. The other waste, the liquid waste, including any wastewater from washing hands and all that, is ejected outside space, outside the shuttle into space. And you may remember in the very early days, there was an incident in which they just didn't eject that stuff with enough force, and it froze to the side of the space shuttle. Not only an undignified way to return to Earth, but now you've seen the tiles, so it was very possibly dangerous. If that stuff had flipped off on reentry and broken tiles, they could have been in real trouble. This was in the early days, though. They didn't even have spacesuits yet, so they had to remain inside the shuttle. First, they aimed the shuttle and maneuvered it so that the sun would shine on it, tried to melt it. Good idea, but it didn't work. So eventually, what they did was to use the robot arm, 60 feet long, which can be controlled from inside the space shuttle, and it was Judy Resnick who was able to maneuver this arm and knock this thing off, and the day was saved. From that day on, they always made sure they had the arm with them, because before that, they weren't intending to take it on every mission, but only when they had a definite scientific purpose for it. But it turned out to be such a neat thing to have in emergencies that it went on every mission thereafter. One last thing about the toilet. They take potty training very seriously at NASA, and at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, every astronaut has to go through toilet training. They have a toilet that's exactly like the one up on the space shuttle, except to make sure you're doing everything the right way, they have a television camera that aims up the hole at you. Plus, they have an alarm system. So the astronaut will learn, in NASA's words, when he or she has made a bullseye. Bells go off. The astronauts affectionately refer to this place as the moon room. So now you know, which you can probably hear bits and pieces of all the time. But it is good that we can still laugh at some of this because, of course, you know that the astronauts are very famous for their special sense of humor. I did train with Krista and with Judy Resnick. In fact, Judy Resnick was the niece of my former school district, Clareton's superintendent. And so I had followed her career through the space program, was really excited to get to meet her. And I'd also met Mike Smith, the pilot. And you'll see a slide of Judy in here that I left in, and I had debated about that, but it really shows the joy she had and that she was up there doing what she wanted to be doing. So the kids laugh, but it's okay, because it really shows what she was up to. So what we're going to do now is to see some of those slides, and here's the shuttle being taken out on the crawler. It's hard to see it to the launch pad, and in the distance there, that's launch pad 39A. Every shuttle mission except the last one took off from this launch pad. The Challenger took off from 39B, which had nothing to do with the accident, but it is ironic that it was the first time they'd ever used that second launch pad. Okay, let's switch it. Okay, when you see a shuttle take off, you see a lot of what you might think is smoke, but it's really a big cloud because the fuel in the red tank, the external tank, is liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. You stick hydrogen and oxygen together, and you've got H2O, water. Heat water hot enough, and you've got steam. In addition, and you'll see this on the videotape, there are water towers near the launch pad, and just as they're ready to go, it floods with 300,000 gallons of water, they flood the launch pad until the water builds up to 6 feet. And what that is for is to act as a shock absorber, to absorb the sound. The vibration of the sound alone would be enough to wreck the back end of the space shuttle. So all this water together with the fuel release of the steam, that makes the big puff of what looks like smoke, but is really steam. Okay, let's switch it. You do see some flames, let's switch it again, but those are coming strictly from the solid rocket boosters, the two white ones. And those are the ones I mentioned you can't turn off. They have a different fuel in them, looks like old tire treads, and each one is about the height of the Statue of Liberty, but each one weighs about 3 times as much as the Statue of Liberty when it's loaded. We can switch it again. In this picture, you can clearly see that out of the back of the orbiter's engines, you've got the vapor, the steam, and out of the back of the rocket boosters, you have the flame. You'll also notice that the external tank in this picture, that we keep talking about as the big red tank, is white. If you ever see a picture like this, you know it's one of the early missions, because they used to paint it white just to be pretty. No better reason than that. But the paint alone for it weighed 1,000 pounds, and they never used that tank again, so they finally quit painting it. Okay, let's switch it. And here's what should happen. At 28 miles, the rocket boosters, after about 2 minutes, should separate, fall back to Earth, to the ocean. Ships go out and get them, and parts of them can be used over again. Let's switch it. But the big external tank is simply too big to store. It's about 154 feet tall, and it's simply easier for them to make a new one each time than to try to find a place to store the old one. So as it falls back through the atmosphere, they let it burn up. Okay, let's turn it. And we're going to turn it again. We're going to skip some of these to get to the video check. This picture shows us once more why our volunteer astronauts up here on the stage were in such a small area. You can clearly see the windows of the flight deck and why the crew quarters are so small. You can also see that the doors to the cargo bay are usually open during most of the mission, and that's because the interiors of the doors act as radiators to get the heat away from the shuttle and help to control temperature. The skinny white thing there that looks like a skeleton arm is the robot arm that we just talked about. And at the back of the shuttle, look at the 2 white things that look like aspirin tablets. Those are sun shields, and under them are the satellites that are going to be deployed, and they're being protected from the sun until they're up in orbit and then can protect themselves. And you'll see them open up later on the videotape when the satellites come out. Okay, let's switch it. And there's a commander up in the flight deck. You can see that he's even more crowded than down below. Also, there are about 2,000 dials and switches, and he has to know what every one of those things do. And with just a little bit of time I had in the simulator as a commander, I can only begin to imagine what it must be like to have to really know what every one of those does, especially under emergency conditions. Okay, let's turn. Once they're up there, they're just wearing the t-shirts. We can switch it again. And one more time. And this is Ox, this is the 6'5" astronaut looking at some bees to see if they'll still make honey in weightlessness, and they did. But I put this in because this was a student's idea for a project. And anytime a student has a really neat idea about what he or she would like to see happen in space, then they can write to NASA and it might fly. And I recently met I can't remember what school she's from, but she's a Pennsylvania student, I think somewhere near Harrisburg, who thought of a project when she was a sophomore that should have flown already. It would have gone up already this past summer if it hadn't been for the accident. But hers will be the first student project flown when they start to fly again. And it was just a pretty simple idea. You know, kids can think in terms that seem pretty obvious, and yet nobody thought of doing her particular project before. Okay, let's turn it. Here they are, just hanging around the middeck. This is where we had Mr. Small and Mr. Lindstrom and all of you who volunteered. They're in that area. And you can see they really can't get too far away from each other. Okay, let's turn it. And there's Sally Ride, first American woman in space. And she did that on Challenger, and it won't even be 4 years ago until June. So it hasn't been long that we've had American women in space, and yet I think it's pretty accepted now. And there she is using the sleep restraint. Really a lot like a big sleeping bag. Okay, I'll turn it, and there she is. That's Judy Resnick, and you can see hair flying. And on her locker it says, "I love Tom Selleck," the guy who plays Magnum P.I. She adored him. She even invited him to the Challenger lunch. And on a clipboard, I don't know if you can see it, but it says, "Hi, Dad." Okay, let's switch it. And that's Joe Allen, the little guy who spilled his orange juice on purpose. And anytime you see somebody who looks like they're being tortured, they're usually trying to figure out what causes space sickness. And that's what they're doing to poor Joe here. Okay? Here's a man on a treadmill, and again, notice how crowded everything really is. He too is in the middeck. He has big straps on to keep him down so he'll get some exercise. And the shuttle can go around the whole world in an hour and a half. So what these guys do, especially as an initiation rite, is to get on the space shuttle when it's over California, and then they jog for just 12 minutes. By that time, the shuttle's over New York State, and they can say, "I just jogged across the whole United States." Okay, let's turn it. Here's a little monkey. The kids love this one. They took some monkeys up to see if they'd like weightlessness, and most of them did, but this particular one was extra sensitive, and he had a nervous breakdown. Now, the reason was that when the astronaut came in towards him, at first he might be eyeball to eyeball, and that was fine. But another time, because of weightlessness and being able to be upside down and all, the astronaut might come at the monkey with the astronaut's eyes where the monkey's mouth was, and the astronaut's mouth up where the monkey's eyes were, and it just flipped this little guy out. Could not imagine what this weird-looking face was with eyeballs in the wrong place. Once they determined that was his problem, they told the astronaut to approach the monkey eyeball to eyeball every time, and then he had a great trip. Okay, let's turn it. This is what you're going to see on the videotape. Before you saw the things looking like aspirin tablets. Now the sun shields have opened up, look like Pac-Man. The turntable is starting to spin, and out comes the satellite on a pan deploy. And you'll actually see this same satellite. It's Telesat. It's a communication satellite doing its thing on videotape, and it'll be spinning then. Okay, let's turn it. Let's turn it again. We're going to skip some of these. This is a satellite, and the big square things. Anybody know what those are? What are those square things? Solar, right? Solar panels. They can now make the solar panels so thin when they go up into space, because there's no wind blowing on them, that they can be 100 feet high and yet fold down into 7 inches to get them aboard the space shuttle. Okay, let's switch again. There's the robot arm we talked about earlier, made by Canada. They're very proud of that. Made that for us. Okay, let's turn it. And they can even stand on that. If you were standing on that, you too would be zipping around at over 17,000 miles an hour, hanging off the end of that. We're going to skip again. Okay, one more, Dustin. I'm going to skip some of these. Skip again, and again, and again. We're going to skip through to get to the video tip. Shuttle comes in for a landing. Of course, it is falling in, touches down at over 200 miles an hour, but once it's down, it has no engines to go back up again. So let's turn it, and this is how it gets back to Florida, piggyback ride. The cone out the back is aerodynamically just to help them so that they can slip through the air and not have drag the way the normal back end of the shuttle would be. Okay, let's go again. And again, here's some of our space art. We're going to skip another one. This is how the Earth would look if you're up in space in a shuttle. You're only up about 200 miles, and you can tell at least that it's Earth, even if you're not sure of your geography. However, in satellites, which are much higher, maybe 600 miles, we'll switch now and I'll show you. It's much tougher to tell what you're looking at. That happens to be Harrisburg. But there are many uses for satellite pictures. And so I'm going to show you a couple of interesting ones. Let's turn it. This happens to be a satellite picture, an enhanced one of Lake Michigan. The black is the lake. The white stuff there is the pollution from 7 steel mills as seen from 600 miles up. And that was used in a back-to-space law in a lawsuit about acid rain. Used a similar one when Vermont sued New York State to show Lake Champlain being polluted by the paper mills in New York State. The coloring in the lake was different. Okay, let's switch it again. Here, everybody put your thinking caps on. You see a real straight line diagonally down the middle. It's darker orange on top and lighter on the bottom. And if you have big brothers or sisters at the high school who are my students, don't tell them what this is, because I'm teaching them geography now. I'm going to get them to try to analyze this picture. What it happens to be is the border between Canada and the United States. You try to think what would make such a straight line. You figure if you're some Martian or alien coming in, that you've got to think that's man-made. This is 600 miles up, because a river or a mountain chain just couldn't be that straight. If you're thinking it's a highway, that's a better idea, but it doesn't account for why there are 2 different colors. What this turns out to be is land use. In Canada, they have cattle grazing, and in Montana, they grow wheat. And they grow their wheat right up to the straight man-made border. And you can see it from 600 miles up. Okay, let's switch it. This is an artist picture again, back to our space artist, of the Hubble, whoops, wait, the other one now, wait a minute, zip by me. There, thank you. Okay, this is the Hubble Space Telescope, and it's not up there yet. It should have gone up already, but because of the accident, it's not going to go up till they can fly again. It's too big to go in anything but a shuttle. However, it's incredible because it'll be seeing farther than anything. It'll be the greatest leap since Galileo looked through a telescope because it won't have to look through the atmosphere. So it would be like being here, looking at somebody on top of the Empire State Building holding a dime and being able to focus in and read the date on the dime. It's going to see 14 billion light years. And there are some scientists who think the whole universe began about 15 billion years ago. So it's like looking back in time to the beginning of everything. And they have no idea what they're going to see the first time they do that. The TDRS B satellite, which in part is to beam back information from this thing, was destroyed on Challenger, a $100 million satellite. So the first time the shuttle flies again, what it'll take up will be another TDRS B, and then eventually this will go up. So thanks a lot for coming tonight.
I want to thank Pat for sharing with us tonight. And what she did tonight is a little bit more than what she's been able to do in the schools. So you did get some things tonight that she hasn't told the youngsters. But I want to thank Pat for coming out tonight. It's been a tough week for her. Still has another 2.5 days to go. But if you do have any questions, please stay and ask her. Thank you, Pat.